Hi guys, it's been a while. I have created some videos on YouTube. I've been a little busy, so I pulled out some time now. I can. I'm back now for again to show you some scripts on LoadRunner. I got a request recently asking me how to create a function in a Vuegen script. Well, I'll show you. It's pretty simple. I'll show you the same for you. Uh, Before I continue, let me set the expectations of this particular video here. The expectation is not, I will not tell you what are the uses of this function, why a function needs to be created, and all that. I'm just creating this video only to give a demonstration or demo for how to create a function. But however, I'll take a quick moment to tell you why these functions are. Well, in a particular script, if a piece of code is repeating multiple times, okay, let's say there are 4 lines and these 4 lines are repeating continuously at different portions of the script, then what you can do is you can create a function for these 4 lines and call this function whenever you require that in the script. Okay, but however, as I've told you, I'm not going to go deep explaining the functions, like purpose of it and all that, but just give you a ballpark idea as to what it is. And also, whenever we are talking about a function, there is one thing that you have to remember. Let's say this is our function. So always a function, whenever we talk about it, there should be certain input. It could be one or it could be more than one, and there should be certain output. Okay, so you can have an output completely void, which means that it doesn't have any output, or written 0, and it could have an input, one input, or you could have as many inputs as possible. This is what, whenever we talk about function, there should be certain inputs and outputs. As I've told you, the output can be void, the input you can have as many as you want. Okay, so having given you that background, let me create a function for you now. Okay, so let me figure out. I'll create a function for a very small piece of code for think time. Okay, I don't want it to complicate. Here the demonstration is to how to create a function. So I'm not going to pick up a very complicated code which contains 3 to 4 lines or more and then make the things harder for you. I'll pick up a code which is a single line over here and I'll create a function for this. Okay, generally if it's a single line, nobody would create a function in the real world, but just for the demonstration purposes, I'll create a function for this think time and I will call it. Why think time? Because the think time will be repeated at multiple places. So whenever a piece of code is repeating at multiple places, this is the piece of code that is ideal for creating a function. Ideally, you wanted not a single line but multiple lines so that you can create a function, so that you have to create a function. But here I'm doing it just for our demo purposes. I'm doing it for this single line. Okay. First, for creating the function, there are certain things that you have to do. The function can be created in the extra files. Where it is in the extra files. Okay, let me create a function. Let me say on the right click on the extra files, or right click, and then you say create new file and give a name to it. Maybe I'll call this as extra functions, extra func extra functions, and it's a .c file. Always create a .c, or maybe .h files. H file also works, so I'll go with a .c file. Okay, so you see extra functions.c is added. Now you can start creating the function over here. You can start creating a function, or you can start creating multiple functions over here. Okay, but before I start creating the functions, you go to globals.h, and in this include files, include this extra functions.c as well. So include, make sure the color is matching over here, then the extra files.c which you have created, extra functions.c. You see, extra functions.c is added into this include files, and this include files is there in globals.h. If you double click on globals.h, you'll be able to open this file, and then you include this file that you have just created, which is extra functions.c. Now here you can create as many functions as possible. So let me create one single function first. So this function is for the think time. So every function will have a name. Let me give a name. Okay. Let me give a name called think time function. Okay, let me call it as a function. Usually that's not a naming standard. You don't call it as, you don't end with a function, but just for demonstration purposes, to be absolutely clear that it's a function, I'm giving that name. But in the real world, you would give a name called think time or any meaningful function. You just give a name and it should be fine. As I've told you, the function should have an input, so the input will go in the flower braces, and a function should have an output that goes over here. So what is the input for this? The input for this is the think time. So let me call that as TT. Okay, and the output, it's not providing any output, just give a void. Just give a void. Make sure the color changes. The color changes, then you got the case right. If you have a capital V, then the color won't change, and the Vusion will not be able to compile it. Okay, so now you can start creating the function. And by the way, this TT, you have to give what kind of data type it is. It's an int. Okay, so int and TT. So here in this function, all you are doing is just creating a think time. The input for this is coming from here, which is TT, and you have a semicolon. Every LR function ends with a semicolon, so I've added the semicolon. Now your small function is ready. What would this function would do? It will add a think time to wherever you add this function. It will execute this think time. And what is this TT? The TT, it's a think time. So now we will call this function wherever is required. So ideally this piece of code should be good enough, but I'm replacing that with the function. Okay, so what does this function take as an input? If you go back to your extrafiles.h, it will take input TT, which is a think time, as an input. So let me pass that value. So let's say you wanted the think time of 10 seconds, pass that 10 seconds over here, and any LR function or any custom function, anything that you have created should end with a semicolon. So you have added the semicolon. So this 10 value that you have given, that value you're passing it on to this function, this think time, that value will be submitted over here. So input is a think time, and that think time you're passing it from here, which is 10 seconds. If you want 15 seconds, you pass it from here, and that 50 seconds go over here. That TT will become 50 seconds, and that TT will be substituted over here. Okay, so whatever you're passing from here, that value will be whatever you're providing it over here as an input to this function, and that value will be passed on to this TT. TT will be assigned to that value, which is 10 seconds, and then that 10 seconds will be substituted over here. Okay, now let me go ahead and execute. Let me put a toggle point over here just to see, if it's going to the function and executing the function or not. I'll put a toggle point over here, and now let me go ahead and run this script. But before I start running it, I would like to compile the script. You see there are no errors detected, which means that there's no problem with this one, okay? And there is no problem with calling this function, or no problem with the function that you have created over here in this extra functions.c. So let me go ahead and run this script for you. You see now my execution has stopped over here. So ideally it should go to this extra functions.c, and it should start executing this function called think time function. So let me see if it's gonna do that. Let me do the step by step. Yes, it went to this function called think time function, and it is executing LR think time, but the value of TT is 10 seconds. So it has executed that piece of code, and it has come out. So this is how you call a function. This is how you create a function and you call the function. Okay, again I'm telling you, the purpose of this particular video is not to give you as to why function is, where function is used, but just to give a demonstration of it. Probably another day I'll create a video as to where these functions will be used and why these functions has to be created, and all that. Okay, so let me continue. Since I have used this for a very small piece of code for a single line, okay, what I will do is I'll create one more function, but this time around I do it for error handling. Okay, so what would an error handling script would look like. Okay, so let me quickly create that. uh, um, so let me put a text checkpoint over here. Okay, so let me go to the snapshot view. Let me go click on this and then put a text checkpoint from here. Okay, and save count, I'll call this as web tools count. So you're taking again for this error handling, the class is not for the error handling. Okay, but in order for me to explain these functions, I have to create some custom code. So I'm creating this error handling. So probably you can enroll for my recorded videos or from classes to know how this, why this error handling needs to be done, how this error handling code will be built from the scratch and all that. But right away in this video, I'll quickly put the error handling code without much explaining, but the explanation is for the functions. Okay, so let me create an error handling code. There you go, the web tools counter over here, and then you have an ATOI to convert to a string, and if this piece of code is greater than 0, then your transaction is a pass transaction. Let me put a start transaction over here. Let me call this as T1. Okay, so let me end this. Control Shift T is for end transaction, T1. So this is an LR pass. Okay, again I'm telling you this video is not for error handling, so I'm quickly creating the code for this, otherwise it's a fail. So this error handling piece of code, actually this error handling piece of code that I've created over here, okay, so will be used at almost all the transactions. For every single transaction you create, you have to have this error handling piece of code. So since this error handling piece of code will be repeated for this transaction and for this transaction and for this transaction, so what I would suggest is this is an ideal candidate for creating the function. You see, you have more than one line of code, and this line of code is repeated at multiple places. So what I would do is, for all these lines of code, I'll create a function. Okay, I'll create a function and then just call a function at multiple places wherever you require this error handling. So let me create an error handling function. So here I've created one function. Let me create one more function. The output of this is again void. Let me call this function as error handling. If you want to call it as a function, you can add that, or usually people don't do that. Okay, so you can have this error handling function over here. First we have to decide what are the inputs for this. So the inputs for this would be probably the transaction name and this web tools count, or the count. Okay, so these are the two things. So let me create inputs. So for the transaction name, it's a string, so it's a char star transaction name, and then the welcome count is int, so let me call it as count over here. Okay, now I can copy this piece of code from here into this error handling. Okay, just that instead of ATOI and all that, let me replace that with a count. Okay, so if count is greater than 0, then it's a pass transaction. It's a failed transaction. So I don't think you need a semicolon over there. Now let me call this function over here. I know I'm going a little fast, and it's these are very advanced topics. Okay, so usually you don't use these functions much when it comes to performance testing or Vuegen. Only if you wanted, you can. Nobody would force you to use these functions. Only these functions are there to make your life easy. Okay, but the functions itself is making your life hard, then there is no point using the function. But if you watch this video for a couple of times, then you realize that creating functions is not that difficult. So error handling, you have a transaction name, you have to pass the transaction name and you have to pass the count. Okay, so the transaction name is T1. As you can see, the transaction name is T1. So let me pass the T1 over here. Okay, and the count is this value over here. There you go. Okay, so this is an LR parameter. You have converted to an integer and you're calling this as an integer. Okay, so as you can see, the function that you have created, it will take only integers, which is a count, will be assigned that value to a variable called count. So this is an LR parameter that cannot be passed directly, so you have converted to an integer, so that integer will be given to that value called count with the data type integer. Now you're calling this function. Let me delete this piece of code. Okay, so error handling has two inputs. One is the transaction name, one is the count value. So you see the transaction name will be taken T1, okay, and this is the count, and here you replace with the transaction name. Copy that and put it over here and put it over here. Okay, so this count, you get the value from here, which is web2s. On the top of it LR eval string ATOI. Whatever the output of this will be assigned to this variable called count, and the T1 that will be assigned to the variable called transaction name. And make sure this T1 is in the double quotes so that the value T1 goes into it. If you don't put the double quotes, T1 will be considered as a variable. Okay, so you put that double quotes. Now let me see if I have any compilation errors. Hopefully not. It says unterminated string or character count. Let me see where it is. Oh, here is a transaction name. You have to take away the double quotes as well, because it's a variable, you don't need the double quotes. Okay, so let me compile it. Think time function, you have to have a semicolon over here. Okay, any function ends with a semicolon, so you have added that semicolon over here and there are no errors detected. Wonderful. So now this extra functions.c, this file has two functions. One is think time function, one is error handling. Okay, error handling is for the error handling piece of code. Think time is for creating the think time or waiting for the think time. So in my runtime settings, now let me see think time. What are the settings? Ignore think time. Let me replay back the think time. Okay, so what is the think time you're passing? 10 seconds. So it will have to wait for 10 seconds now. So let me put a toggle point over here. Okay, let me put a toggle point even, let's not put a toggle point, let's start executing step by step right from the first, okay, right from the start. Now you have started this transaction called T1 and you have executed this transaction called T1. For ending the transaction, you're calling a function called error handling. So obviously it will go to the error handling piece of error handling function, which is there in extra functions.c. And see what is the count. If count is greater than 0, obviously the count will be greater than 0. It's a pass transaction, so it will end this transaction as pass. So you see the transaction has passed now. Now you're calling the function called think time function. So it will go to the think time function, which is there in extra functions.c. Here all you are doing is executing this LR think time. Now in my runtime settings, you said you execute think time, so it has to wait here for 10 seconds. So you see LR think time 10 seconds, it's executing that think time. So once the 10 seconds is done, now the control will go back to your script. So it is still executing. You see now the control has come back, which means that the execution is done. The waiting of 10 seconds is done. Now the script will go back to your main action. So here in this video, I've created two functions, think time function with a single line of code in the think time function. Usually people don't do that if it's a single line. And then one more function called error handling, which has multiple lines over here, error handling. And as I've told you, any function would have an input and an output. Here both the functions have an output as void, which means that it doesn't have any output. Here the first function has one input, the second function has two inputs. One is an integer, data type integer, the other one is a character. I hope you have learned the functions. Start practicing it, start creating it, and keep posting, keep providing some on my YouTube channel. You can like my channel, you can subscribe to my channel, and add some comments if you wanted to know, if you wanted some concepts that you want from me. You can always add me, you can always add that in the comments, and whenever I have time, I'll try to pull out some time and create some videos for that. Hope you have enjoyed that video, guys. Thank you so much. And if possible, if you want to learn more about LoadRunner, you can always subscribe to my recorded videos, LoadRunner recorded videos, or my live trainings. Thank you so much for joining me here.